Government officials report the virus is not airborne, but can be transferred through contact with blood.
The Luminary Lighthouse presents nothing new under the sun or nuts.
In Texas, we often boast that everything's bigger. The land, the tales, and even the mysteries. But beyond the sprawling ranches and the beaver gas stations, lies a city where its curious past whispers elusive secrets that are seemingly right in front of us. Galveston, Texas is close to the county I grew up in, and until recently, I never knew its full history. What I mean by that is, I knew the history that's given to us, but that regurgitated script we've all been taught never set right with me. And remember, this is all pure speculation. It's okay to traverse these lands and yell the whispered theories. Also, I do not intend to degrade our capabilities as humans or disrespect anyone. In fact, I believe we are much more than we are told. Have you ever been walking next to an antique structure or seen some ancient buildings randomly in a movie and thought to yourself, how in the hell did they build that in that time period? Well, that's been really interesting me lately, and I've been very intrigued with this Tartaria movement that's been discussed. If you aren't familiar with the topic, the theory argues that an advanced civilization encompassing various cultures such as the Moors of America once peacefully thrived on this realm not too long ago. It's essential to understand that our cookie-cutter history we've all had to memorize is about as authentic as McDonald's chicken nuggets. While it's presented as chicken, deep down, we all know it's not. Our true narrative of our past might be far more intriguing and complex than we could ever imagine. Now that I've lost half the viewers for this video, let's delve deeper into the warm bosom of speculation and see if Galveston's, as well as others later on, historical narrative starts or continues your free fall into the rabbit hole. Here's a quick general history. I know, sorry, I gotta lay the foundation here. This 1837 map represents the earliest printed layout of Galveston, predating the formal survey and design of the city. The map presents a vision of Galveston as a more developed city than later plans, featuring a grand oceanfront boulevard that prefigures the modern Seawall Boulevard. The layout features normally spaced blocks and notably large corporate properties. The identities of the map's creator are unknown, but it's speculated that members of the city company may have played a role in its conception. However, it's unlikely. The skepticism arises from the pamphlet's references to the presumed artist in the third person, and even misspelling his name. What if the map was based on an existing concept, or one that once was? The narrative begins very quickly in the 1930s when Galveston emerged as a vital commercial hub, its port serving as the gateway to Texas. Galveston harbored enormous vessel traffic. Between 700 and 1,400 vessels called the port every year. Blessed with a natural harbor, Galveston quickly became the most active port west of New Orleans, attracting merchants, adventurers, and settlers drawn to the promise of opportunity. The city thrived, its skyline dotted with the sails of ships from around the world, its streets bustling with the vibrancy of a cosmopolitan community. The Strand became a popular place for significant businesses to set up shop and quickly turned into the Wall Street of the Southwest. As the largest city in Texas for a time, Galveston was a mosaic of cultures, ideas, and innovation. From 1838 to the late 1800s, there were 18 Texas newspapers started in Galveston. Most were headquartered on the Strand. The Strand also holds the building that won the title as the first building built solely for a newspaper in Texas. But that's not the only first in Galveston. You ready for this list? Galveston had the first chapter of the Masonic Order in Texas, first bank chartered under the National Bank Act, first use of the telegraph to send news dispatches, first post office, first opera house, first hospital, first golf course, first country club, first cotton compress, first insurance company, first real estate firm, first jewelry store, first Jewish Reform congregation, first use of telegraph for news dispatches, first gas lights, first electric street lights, first electric street cars, first trade union, first cotton exchange, first telephone, first drugstore, first bakery, first grocery store, first ship through the Panama Canal, first public library, first ice factory, first medical school, and first nurse school. First orphanage, first Navy base, first Roman Catholic Church, first Roman Catholic Cathedral, first Weather Bureau, first African American Hospital, first Colored High School, and first Medical College. Whew! It's interesting to me that Galveston became the cradle to so many firsts in Texas, during a time when other cities within the Lone Star State were also growing with potential. I understand it could have been many reasons. After all, it was the gateway to Texas. It's key to note that a large portion of buildings in Galveston are founded and not constructed or built when stating its inception. Galveston, as you can see, was a city of exotic elegance that appeared to stick out like a mountain in a meadow. Before I entertained the ideas of alternative history, I never would have pictured any city within America looking the way Galveston once did. What I later found out is that it wasn't only Galveston. It was a large majority of our major cities and even small towns. If you peel back the veil of our history just a bit, you start to see the oddities within the illusion. Central to the city's narrative is Nicholas J. Clayton, an architect whose legacy is etched into the very stones and spires of Galveston's most iconic structures. Clayton, born in Ireland in 1839, went from a plasterer to constructing his first independent job in Austin, Texas, St. Mary's Church, as well as St. Edward's University in 1888, but caught fire in 1903. This would set the tone for this era, which was coined the Clayton era. Assisting in this title was the alluring Venetian Gothic marvel that was the Ursuline Academy, to the historic dance hall of Garden Vereen. Clayton's work is celebrated for its intricate designs and enduring beauty. An interesting part within these one-of-a-kind elaborate buildings is that across Texas and even across the world, you will find similar construction as you do in Galveston. This is Shelby County Courthouse, which is a small East Texas city that you'd never expect to have relatable spires to the Ursuline Academy. Shelby County, organized in 1837, was one of the original counties of Texas, named for American Revolutionary soldier Isaac Shelby from Kentucky. Its county seat center has been just that since 1866. The courthouse itself is a two-story Romanesque brick building. It's said that the 2 million bricks were made by the architect, while the mortar was made from sand and toted via docks cart from Louisiana, some 40 miles away. Just north of Center is the Friday Night Lights community of Carthage, Texas. One of the worst architectural errors occurred in Panola County in 1956. The 1885 courthouse, which is a twin to Shelby County Courthouse, was replaced with the 1953 structure that's used today. The old courthouse was auctioned for materials and a park was made of the courthouse lawn. These two courthouses alone bring up so many questions. Why would you want to make another 40-mile trip from Louisiana and produce another 2 million bricks? Now that's dedication. This is a similar storyline that you find through our written history. Also, those spires look like they had more of a purpose than being part of a style. I want you to take notice of all the different spires within this video. They do look like they're harnessing the natural forces around them. Now, back to Clayton. He did more for the Victorian Gothic style than any other in Texas. The Ursuline Convent expressed intricate medieval styles. It was called a delightful Venetian Gothic edifice. I mean, guys, look at this monstrosity. I can't stop staring at it. It'd be crazy if he did more. The Dallas Ursuline Academy, constructed in 1882, had 6 nuns from Galveston, starting the academy with only 7 students. However, the school grew in size and reputation, becoming a well-known academic fixture in Dallas for 76 years. Unfortunately, the beautiful architectural structure in Dallas was demolished when the academy moved to a new location. Moving on, St. Mary's was founded in 1866 as the Charity Hospital, which was renamed to St. Mary's Infirmary. The hospital in 1875 had Clayton design a $50,000 wing, adding to the 2-story original structure. The unique 3-story brick addition provided 27 private rooms with a total capacity of 150 beds. Over the years, a chapel and a convent were added to the site. St. Mary's also had an orphan asylum, which should not be confused with this, the Island City Protestant Orphan Asylum, which was founded in 1870 in a wooden structure that dodged the great 1885 fire. Henry Rosenberg bequeathed funds for a more modern orphanage to fit the surrounding look, I'm guessing, which was, yep, you guessed it, Gothic Revival. But not by Clayton, but another character you'll get to know coming up when we dive into Galveston's historic houses. Galveston alone had, from what I could find, 3 orphanages, which I thought was odd. What is now the Bryan Museum on 22nd Street was the Galveston Orphanage, which from 1878 to 1984 housed around 6,500 children, and that's just one of the 3. These massive orphanages were everywhere, as well as the even more mind-boggling structures that were the insane asylums. I mean, look at these. They look like Daenerys Targaryen's castles. If her dragons were gargoyled on one of those spires, I'd have fewer questions than I do now. What would need to happen if one wanted to erase the past and present during this time? Wouldn't you have to start with the civilians and structures? I'm sure you're thinking that's way too many people to rewire or erase. Not if you're the puppet master. I want you to look at the reasons people were admitted into these insane asylums and ask yourself, is this made from people that want to help? Or is it from soulless individuals who just moved another chess piece within the game? Ball High School was founded in 1881, but this majestic structure's cornerstone was laid on February 15, 1884. And as Clayton does, he had the doors open October 1st, 1884. See, this is what's hard for me. This state capitol type structure that was used as a high school took 7 or 8 months to build? Come on, dude. It's kind of similar to El Paso High School, when I found out it was founded in 1916.
What in the tarnation is that?
We've been looking at these structures our whole life with no thought of how and when it got there. This onion dome is just simply a style of architecture. Okay, well, how'd they do that when it's said to be built? And if its inception story is true, then again, we have the wrong idea of that era. What advancements did we have? That's not easy to do. The seasonal beach hotel of Galveston, designed by Clayton, was an ornate and colorful 3-story pile with multiple balconies constructed entirely from wood. The hotel was built in 1882. Owner William H. Sinclair opened the hotel on July 4th, 1883. Unfortunately, and fortunately, I guess, the resort did not make it to the 1900 hurricane because of a mysterious fire in 1898. Boy, oh boy, are there some mysterious fires within this era. The beach hotel had provided a site for fireworks, bands, and as you can see, must have had some animals exhibited or something, I don't know, weird. Another structure of Clayton's was the Electric Pavilion that had a similar story as the beach hotel. As you can see, high wire walkers were popular within the 19th century, which reminded me of a similar photo which was in Austin, Texas. And you can see in the background the Texas state capitol is drawn in with a whitewashed sky. These both are very common to see in photos in the 19th century. Oh yeah, and for the Electric Pavilion, yeah, it burned less than 2.5 years after it was built. Late in the 19th century, Galveston was selected as the location of the state medical school. The Ashbel Smith building was assembled to house classrooms, offices, laboratories, and physiology and anatomy amphitheaters. The building was built from 1889 to 1890, 1 year. Another impressive feat tackled by Clayton. The Smith building was Clayton's beautiful example of a round arched architecture with an extensive base. If you look at these spires, which are much like Shelby County's courthouse and its demolished stepbrother Panola County, the points at the top have been removed. Is it just simply a small alteration? Or was it removed to disable this geometrically sound structure in some way? Constructed between 1881 and 1883, Nicholas Clayton built Harmony Hall, which was originally intended as a gathering place for the Jewish community of Galveston. However, due to financial issues, the building was sold. It became the premises of the Galveston Business University. The building's corner tower was sheared off from the 1900 storm. The building was restored and served as the Scottish Rite Temple until a fire led to its destruction in 1928. A front-page story in the Galveston Daily News on the following day said, "A demon fire-licked his way ravenously through the rich furnishings, gutted the building, cracked its walls with fiery breath, and sent flying debris into the streets where thousands of Galvestonians stood helplessly by." Back then, many of the Masons worked downtown, and even as the building burned, they were able to save many of the library books and some of the furniture, said a master mason and member of the Scottish Rite for 56 years. They moved almost everything, even the grandfather clock from the hall's first floor to the Con and Levy building, as well as the elaborate Italian marble staircase, which was also saved. Listen to this. The staircase was removed piece by piece, cleaned, and given a place in our new home. In fact, the surviving staircase became a centerpiece for the current cathedral, the Art Deco masterpiece designed by Alfred C. Finn. How did Nicholas Clayton, amid the limitations of his time, achieve architectural feats that continue to define Galveston's skyline? I hope the questions arose, as they did for me, about the unseen hands and minds that contributed to these monumental tasks. Who were the craftsmen, the laborers, and the thinkers that transformed Clayton's visions into stone and mortar? And how did they accomplish such intricate work with the rudimentary tools of their era? From 1873 to 1912, Mr. Clayton has had 48 structures claimed to be his workings. Doesn't the puzzle pieces not fit just right within this narrative? Are you seeing it? Now, let's dig deeper, this time within the historic houses of Galveston, Texas. Well, I made a video, as I stated, which I thought I'd just play through without any narration, but it's too mysterious not to speak on. So, here are some of my favorite narratives within this topic, and once again, we will investigate another architect within Galveston's story, Alfred C. Mueller. One of the more distinctive homes, or should I say castles, is the Troop Castle. Constructed primarily of brick, the Troop Castle spans 3 stories with a basement, which is an unusual feature for Galveston homes of its time. The building's design includes a total of 20 rooms with intricate woodworking, stained glass windows, and ornate fireplaces that highlight the interior's craftsmanship and attention to detail. The craftsman for this is yet again unknown, but we do know the architect. Alfred Mueller has many other fascinating creations such as this. Let's veer off a bit. The original old main building served as the heart of Sam Houston State University, right next to one of the oldest buildings in Texas, Austin Hall, built in 1851 as a simple and elegant Greek revival style. Between 1889 and 1890, Alfred Mueller built Old Main in Victorian Gothic style and had a reputation as the most beautiful building owned by the state of Texas. On February 12, 1982, disaster struck. Old Main was engulfed in flames, and despite noble efforts, Old Main was beyond saving. In 1887, Alfred Mueller won a competition for his first major building project in Galveston, the beautiful Galveston City Hall and Farmers Market. An in-depth description of the structure is within Howard Barnstone's book, The Galveston That Was. He states, "It was once a fine example of the French Renaissance. The ground floor base is highly rusticated from foundation on which it sits a myriad of columns, statues, and architectural paraphernalia ranging from 14th century English windows to 16th century Italian balustrades and 18th century American pilasters and garlands. Springing from the east and west corners of the south elevation were minaret-like round bays, rather precariously hung and crowned with mansard tile roofs and open fletches. The central tower had an open Palladian motif pass-through below the clock. The building was 3 stories high," Barnstone continues, "with the farmers' market occupying the ground floor. The other 2 floors were city offices. The north portico, with its 8 iconic columns and decorated frieze, made an imposing sight. The grand stairways on the east and west sides made the building look even larger. In the hurricane in 1900, the building, though severely damaged, was used as a refuge for the victims." Barnstone closes with a description of the building as it exists circa 1965. Architecturally, the building has been completely ruined since. The 3rd story and tower have been removed, and where there had been statuary and other architectural motifs, signs designated the north section as the police department and the south section as the central fire station have been installed. French Renaissance. That's exactly what I picture when somebody says, "Hey, you wanna go get some tomatoes at the farmer's market?" Soon after Galveston City Hall in 1892, Alfred Mueller built the Calcasieu National Bank in Lake Charles, Louisiana, which was the first state bank in the area. It was organized and opened for business that same year. The name of the bank came from the local 200-mile Calcasieu River, which was a principal waterway for the lumber industry and had along its banks 28 mills. Louisiana has always caught my attention with its antique look and rich history. This again will have to be a topic for another day. I love me some Cajuns, man. Go down on the bayou, get some alligators. Mueller, who was Herman Morawitz's nephew, built this abode for him, but Morowitz was impoverished by the construction costs, which quadrupled, and he never lived in the house. Minnie Bedell LaRue ran a boarding house there instead, who was the daughter of Confederate Captain William Harry Bedell and widow of Victor Donacio LaRue, who was born in 1872 in Mexico and was son of Frenchman Jean-Baptiste Clement LaRue. Those names sounded important, so I just put it. Anyways, moving on. Mueller, like Clayton, has had some pretty amazing structures attached to his name and just as impressive agility by his unknown laborers. If I look harder, I may find that prisoners were the engineers to some. Cat Williams did say it best recently.
This whole thing where slaves are stronger people is a fallacy. We like to believe that slaves are stronger. Slaves are weaker because they don't eat the right food and they live a terrible life. Your slave population is not smarter and better conditioned unless you're enslaving the Jews.
I'm sure he'd have plenty more projects I could question, but on June 29, 1896, at age 40, he died of typhoid fever in Galveston and is buried at Lakeview Cemetery. Now, let's get back to the program. This is Seeley Mansion, also called the Open Gates, which its grandness suits the family due to the high status within the city limits and the state of Texas. John Seeley, the son, was part of the first graduating class at the state capitol of a high school we viewed, Ball High School. He was founder of Magnolia Petroleum Company, which eventually was purchased by Standard Oil, who today is Mobil Oil. At the time of his death in 1926, John Seeley II was said to be the wealthiest man in Texas. John's father, George Seeley, had this monument built for his wife, Magnolia, and their 4 children, who all referred to it as the Big House. It was designed by a New York architect named Stanford White, but the construction was supervised by none other than Nicholas Clayton, who constructed in, take a guess, what style? Neo-Renaissance. You thought I was going to say Gothic, didn't you? Now let's look at a few more of Clayton's masterpieces and just some other random houses that I thought were interesting within Galveston. Then we'll end with the palace of all palaces. Now, let's look at Bishop's Palace, also known as Gresham's Castle. It's one of the most intricate houses located in Galveston, Texas. This architectural marvel is indeed one of Nicholas Clayton's mind-boggling creations, showcasing his talent in the elaborate design styles of the Victorian era. Constructed between 1887 and 1892 for lawyer and politician Walter Gresham, his wife, and their 9 children, the house spans over 19,000 square feet, making it one of the largest historic homes in Texas. The interesting part are the choice of materials: sculpted granite, limestone, and sandstone, alongside more wood carvings within the interior than one might find at Sanda's workshop. The Roman Catholic Diocese of Galveston purchased this architectural gem later, adding to its historical significance. Located across from another Clayton's masterpiece, the Sacred Heart Church, or more specifically the Onion Dome, which must have been an easier task than I'm making it. Over the years, Bishop's Palace has survived several natural disasters that have hit Galveston, underscoring its resilience and the quality of its construction. The number of natural disasters from the palace's inception to the present day is perplexing, to say the least. When you study these sad occasions, even earlier than 1887 till today, for me, seem less coincidental or natural and more deliberate. Stay with me. This last chapter is the real conspiracy.
A lot of you out there are probably asking, well, why show us this? The war's over. Well, we wanted to let you in on one of the big secrets of the war. Thought you might be interested.
Remember as kids the simple fascination of using a magnifying glass to focus sunlight into a fiery pinpoint, marveling as leaves smoldered or ants hurried to escape the intense heat? I think a lot of you have become aware that our taxpayer dollars have helped invent some pretty advanced weaponry that may or may not have been used against us. We often think that these technologies are brand new to the world, but what if they aren't? What if these advanced inventions have been around for thousands of years? Archimedes of Syracuse, a name synonymous with brilliance, devised numerous machines of war to defend his city. Among these, the burning mirror stands out. Legend has it, during the siege of Syracuse in 212 BC, Archimedes constructed a device using polished shields or mirrors, positioned to focus the sun's rays onto the approaching enemy ships. The concentrated beam of sunlight, directed with deadly precision, set the wooden vessels ablaze, safeguarding the city from destruction. Now, let us contemplate. What if Archimedes' burning mirror was not just a singular marvel, but a technology perfected and used for generations? Galveston, like many others, was a more sophisticated city than what I pictured the Wild West days looking like. We all know the destruction of the hurricane of 1900, and we will get to that soon, but before the topic, let's investigate some other lesser-known tragic occurrences on the coast of the great state of Texas. I want you to focus on the details of these events as we are looking into other cities and towns and see if you see any similarities. In 1858, from what I could find, started the history of Galveston's calamities of fire, which is said to have affected Mechanic, Strand, and 22nd Street, which you will see that reoccur. The Morro Castle fire in 1869, a popular public bar and had recently changed into the Cohen Brothers clothing store, totaled a large sum of $1.5 million in damages. It is said to have been destroyed by fire through a robbery. A common theme within these narratives is that the flames flattened the business district of the city, which is exactly what the Morro Castle fire did. The previous castle location was constructed to be the Thomas Jefferson League building, which took a year to build. Thomas Jefferson League was an attorney and the son-in-law of Samuel May Williams, one of the leading statesmen of the Texas Republic, a founder of the city of Galveston, a wharf developer, and a banker. In 1870, another fire amounting to $750,000 hit yet again the Strand and 22nd. 4 years later, the 4-story brick store of Davis and Brothers lost $200,000. The building was located on the Strand intersecting 22nd Street. The fire of 1877 was a devastating one I wasn't aware of. It destroyed $800,000 worth of the business district, which is again the Strand. The inferno that added Galveston to be one of the many labeled great fires in this era is the 1885 event. The flames were discovered in what was known as the Vulcan Foundry, which was located on the Strand. Of course, it is said that much of the city was built of wood, which is why they soon after decided to build with stone. The devastated area was torched just as the sun came up the same day. It was stated of having been a 5-hour fire that ravished 40 blocks of 100 acres amounting to 568 homes. But it was never found that one soul burned in it. The $1.8 million amount made it a front page read throughout the world. There was even a song made about the fire in 1885, which we will see the 1900 hurricane and the Jonestown flood had a comparable way to ingrain in the public's minds what took place. There were significant losses by flame following 1885, which we have discussed in the previous chapters, but we'll add on to the mysteries. The Ursuline Convent's St. Angelo's exhibit hall, which one paper stated, the sisters attempted to extinguish the fire, but seeing that their exertions were futile, they rang the convent bell. Unfortunately, the rope broke, and to add to their discomfort, the fire alarm boxes were found to be out of fix, or the keys could not be found. What a weird sentence, explaining a fire. Anyways, I hope some of you have made it this far in the video, because this is the section where Galveston connects with other cities' narratives from around the world. I can't touch on everything because, well, there's absolutely no way I'll be able to list all of the 18th century Great Fires, or the 19th century Great Fires, or the 20th century Great Fires. Hell, in the 21st century, I didn't even know it, but there was one in Texas recently. And it sure looks old worldish. Galveston's big brother, New Orleans, had a very similar story. The 1788 New Orleans fire, known as the Good Friday Fire, was a devastating event that swept through the city. This calamity began in a private residence who was actually the army treasurer at the time. Once again, it was fueled by a strong wind. It quickly spread throughout the largely wooden city. Yeah, I'm sure you saw that coming. Just like Galveston, the blaze only took 5 hours to destroy. By the time the fire was extinguished, it had destroyed 856 of the approximately 1,100 buildings in New Orleans at the time. Remarkably, the fire resulted in very few fatalities, just like Galveston, but basically wiping out what is known as the French Quarter. It stopped right before the riverfront, spared the Custom House, Tobacco Warehouse, the Governor's Building, the Royal Hospital, and the Ursuline Academy. Wow. Sadly, not Clayton's build, but is where the convent was first founded. Among the new buildings built in place of you-know-what wooden buildings were the St. Louis Cathedral, the Cabildo, and the Presbyter. Let's look at the story and structures of the Ursuline narrative. The first convent was built in 1734, but didn't last long due to deterioration in the humid Louisiana climate. Plans for the second were laid out in 1745 to be constructed where the old one was, which was dismantled for building supplies. The second convent was then completed in 1751 and is a national landmark today. The nuns moved to the Ursuline Convent in the 9th Ward in 1823, giving the old French Quarter structure to the city bishop. The 9th Ward convent was sold to the city in 1910, and the land was used for the industrial canal. So the nuns moved to a new quarter in Uptown, where they are still located today. So where are they today? Another interesting story, similar to Galveston structures, is the New Orleans Custom House, which started being built in 1848 and supposedly didn't finish until 1881. Before the current Custom House, there was one built in 1809, then another in 1819. This monumental all-granite building is one of the finest Greek Revival interiors in the U.S. All-granite building, 1848. How do you slowly build an all-granite building from 1848 to 1881? You know the rules and codes they implemented. Instead of wooden structures, they must build in stone and I guess granite. But after 6 years of rebuilding, on December 8th, 1794, 212 buildings were burned in the French Quarter again. Being a Spanish colony, it was naturally rebuilt in Spanish style in place of the French style architecture that disappeared. Huh, what a coincidence. Portsmouth, New Hampshire's cycle of destruction began on December 26, 1802, the day after Christmas. And it starts as usual that an old wooden house near Market Square, the heart of Portsmouth, caught fire. The blaze quickly spread to Market Street, destroying more than 100 buildings. The property damage was estimated at $130,000, which is approximately $6.5 million in today's dollars. In response to this calamity, the town voted to request state legislation to ban wooden structures 1 story high within the town limits, which always states after this, marking the first significant step towards urban fire safety. I'm telling you, these are all the same narratives, just with a little bit of different wording. But then, no sooner had Portsmouth begun to rebuild, it was hit again by fires in 1806. And again in 1813, with the later being the most devastating. The 1813 fire could be seen as far away as Salem, Massachusetts, destroying 15 city acres and 108 buildings. The insurance company established after the first fire went bankrupt. The 1913 fire began on the northwest corner of Church and Court Street, where the stone church, is located. So that means it previously wasn't there before the fire. The burning of the barn that was there quickly spread the flames to the neighboring buildings. So at times, I feel like these are cover stories for this stone church that was already there to not be there. Does that make sense? Because on December 22nd, 1835, another freaking fire broke out. This blaze resulted in the loss of numerous buildings, including homes, businesses, and public structures, profoundly impacting the community yet again. Yeah, their mental health, what they have left, probably. Another interesting structure within Portsmouth is the naval prison, or the castle as it's called. Is a historic facility with a distinctive architectural profile and complex history that reflects the changing tides of American naval and correctional practices. Constructed initially in 1908, the prison's design and imposing structure, complete with crenulated battlements atop its four guard towers, so the pokey things, have made it a notable landmark. The construction aimed to provide a secure facility for detention of naval personnel who violated military laws, with the architectural invoking a fortress-like appearance to emphasize security and isolation. Yeah. Let's build a castle just so they know, dude. So we invoke a, emphasis on security and isolation. Castle. Yeah. Fortress-like. The onset of the First World War catalyzed a significant change for naval prison. Conflict led to an influx of prisoners, both as a result of heightened military engagement and the stricter enforcement of discipline within the armed forces. By 1918, the prison population had swelled to 2,295 inmates, highlighting the facility's role in the military's disciplinary framework during the time of global upheaval. Reset much? New York had a few great fires. It couldn't pass up New York. One being during the American Revolution in 1776, the second in 1835, and the Great Fire of 1845. Let us just focus on the 1835 Great Fire event, which occurred in the middle of an economic boom, supposedly, and covered 17 city blocks. The flames destroyed hundreds of buildings with an estimated $20 million in property damage, which is equivalent to $602 million in recent years. It's stated that attempts were made to deprive the fire of fuel by demolishing surrounding buildings. This is the details. Later in the evening, a detachment of U.S. Marines and sailors returned at 3 o'clock in the morning with gunpowder from the Brooklyn Navy Yard and began to blow up buildings in the fire's path. I'm sure you can imagine the storyline for the other two, but hear what the papers said about them. In the 1776 fire, it said in the newspapers, it destroyed anywhere from 10 to 20% of the city, and the unaffected parts of the city were robbed and raided. It was stated in the 1835 papers that the destroyed wooden buildings were quickly replaced by larger stone and brick ones that were less prone to burn. Then, as I mentioned, there was another fire 10 years later, so that didn't work. These ancient edifices, relics of bygone era, offer us a window into a civilization where true artistry was not just practiced, but promoted. Imagine the transformation our world might undergo if our gaze were not constantly met with mere rectangles and squares. Each element of these structures an intricacy and uniqueness that sets it distinctly apart from its counterparts. Their colossal stature draws the eye initially, adding layers of mystery to their puzzling origins. Yet, it's only upon closer inspection that their true essence unfolds. The next city is one of my favorites to pick apart. The city with many names of past and present. The White City, Windy City, Chilaga, Chicago, or as we all know it, Chicago. Chicago was one of the cities that validated this theory that maybe we don't have the whole truth about the land we call home. I certainly knew there were lies within America's history, but anything that we need to repeat or memorize from kindergarten through college should raise some suspicion alone. Why can't we at that age learn to meditate or practice how to handle our emotions? Instead, we learn about cover-ups and theories like Miss O'Leary's cow kicking over a lantern and completely decimating a city. Chicago's early days trace back to its establishment as a city in 1837, situated at the southwestern tip of Lake Michigan, on land that was a conversion point for several Native American tribes. This strategic location near the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River watershed made it a key area for trade and military purposes. The land itself was a mix of swamp and forest, which is said that the Chicago's World Fair was built on one of these marshy areas, which is an essential part that we must investigate to show more to this puzzle, and to hopefully make someone realize that these fairs, or expositions as they were called, were something much more than a family-friendly occasion. The beginning of Chicago's first non-native settlement started somewhere in the late 1700s. Chicago's early buildings, and I'm sorry I have to do this, were primarily wooden. Sorry, I know. With the first frame house, the Henry B. Clark House, built in 1836. Wikipedia says that this historic home was constructed in Greek Revival style in 1836. Ah, yes, exactly what I thought an early settler would start with. However, it was the Illinois and Michigan Canal Project, started in the 1830s and completed in 1848, that truly spurred Chicago's growth, transforming it from a fledgling settlement into a bustling city by enabling shipping routes between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River. The newborn Chicago took off from having a population of 4,000 in 1837 and hitting around 30 to 40,000 by 1850. Chicago would end up hitting 1 million people by 1890 and not stopping. With the extremely quick construction that seemed to be in every industry, such as the canal and railroad, by 1870 it was the midway hub for all westerly travels. And this is where we get to 1871, the Great Chicago Fire. From the night of October 8th to the early morning of October 10th, the Great Chicago Fire burned away the entire city, claiming more than 2,600 acres, 18,000 buildings, and 70 miles of pavement. It took out the entire business section and would totally devastate the city. Amazingly, less than 300 people were killed in the fire, but more than 90,000 people were left without shelter. Okay, well, where's that story? Where'd they go? Where'd they stay? We couldn't get the story of where the devastated families went after the fire. Instead, they were confident enough to put down the theory that O'Leary's cow was the fire's origin. I must also note that although Miss O'Leary's extremely rude cow was blamed in every elementary school in America, the story now says that some speculated it being a group of men gambling within O'Leary's barn and knocked over the lantern. Ah, now we're really seeing her true colors. The cow was the fall cow. A major contributing factor to the fire's spread was a meteorological phenomenon known as a fire whirl, which is created due to overheated air rising and meeting cooler air, producing a spinning tornado-like effect. This fire tornado traveled all the way to the coast, picked up sharks, and headed back. No, just playing. Chicago, or Chilaga, depending on which map you're looking at, had 185 firefighters and just 17 horse-drawn steam pumpers to protect the entire city. The initial response of these gentlemen was quick, but it is said that due to an error by the watchman, the firefighter was sent to the wrong place, allowing the fire to grow. Jesus.
It can't happen here, but it did last year.
It's a tragic story. A story that often begins like this.
This is one of the more jaw-dropping parts of this story, is that there were 4 other fires around Lake Michigan within the same day. Peshtigo, Wisconsin being one, killing anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500 people, although Wikipedia says the small town who only had a population of 1,700 at the time. The fire burned about 1.2 million acres and is the deadliest wildfire in recorded history of the United States. The number of deaths is still being debated. The mass graves, both those that are already exhumed and those still being discovered in the small town and the surrounding areas, show that the death toll of the blaze was most likely greater than the 1889 Jonestown flood with a death toll of 2,200. And just in case you forgot, Chicago's death toll was less than 300, which makes Peshtigo's fire 5 times as deadly, and many more times covered up and forgotten. The other fires were at 2 cities across Lake Huron from Peshtigo. An eyewitness, Reverend Peter Pernin, noted that the fire seemed to jump across the Peshtigo River using the bridges and upward air drafts and burn both sides of the town. Other survivors reported that the firestorm or fire tornado threw rail cars and houses into the air. In one account, a man slit the throat of all of his children to spare them from an agonizing death. I swear I read this. I did. I read it on Wikipedia. What the? Did he though? I don't know. Speculation since 1883 has suggested that the start of the Peshtigo and Chicago fires on the same day was not coincidental, but that all the major fires that day were from a comet. Certain behaviors of the Chicago and Peshtigo fire were cited to support the idea of an extraterrestrial cause. Of course, it's extraterrestrial. Not any of us. It came from up there. Such as blue flames thought to be cometary gases burning. However, modern fire theory indicates, modern fire theory knows, it indicates that it would have been poorly ventilated basements full of carbon monoxide producing the blue color. Oh yeah, sounds scientific. Yep, I'm not going to question it. And I can't do any experiments to, light my basement on fire. There are some interesting connections I'd like to point out, though. Now, Peter's personal accounts were nothing I've ever knew a fire could do, but it wasn't until the next account when my mind began to think, what if? Let me read it. The first one on the left, he's talking about seeing globules of fire flying around his house. The second one, he was finding corpses with no scars or burns, but in their pockets, he was finding melted watches, scents, and other articles, it says. Odd. But it's the one on the right that sparked my curiosity. It says, they saw a large black object resembling a balloon, which object revolved in the air with great rapidity, advancing above the summits of the trees towards a house which it seemed to single out for destruction. Barely had it touched the later when the balloon burst with a loud report, like that of a bombshell. And at that same moment, rivulets of fire steamed out in all directions with the rapidity of thought. The house thus chosen was enveloped in flames within and without, so that the person inside had no time for escape. That's odd. A balloon. Now, if you're still under the impression that the clouds above us today aren't anything abnormal and weather controlled is just sci-fi, and you're a conspiracy theorist, then you probably left this video a while ago. We've been poking our atmosphere for much longer than anyone wants to believe. This article read, in 1891, yeah, you read that right, the rain-producing bombs which the United States government are experimenting with, Northern Texas experiments will be made to see if rain cannot be produced by explosions in the air. 100 balloons, each 10 feet in diameter, have been made and shipped to Texas for this purpose. Then the green part. In a few words, the plan is to inflate a balloon with 1 part of oxygen gas and 2 parts of hydrogen gas. A small ordinary cartridge connected with 2 wires is placed in the balloon and the hole is sent up. When the balloon is sufficiently high, the cartridge is exploded by means of electrically sent through the wires. and the two gases unite, forming water. This serves a nucleus to precipitate the moisture of the atmosphere, and there is rain. In the experiments to be performed in Texas, there will be bombs of dynamite carried up by kites and exploded in the air, and mortars will discharge large quantities of giant powder. The most ingenious and practical airship ever constructed is that invented by Professor Carl Myers, which he calls his sky bicycle airship. I've also thought that this photo is rather odd. If the government was sending balloons up to produce rain in 1891, then I'm sure they thought of ways to produce firestorms and tornadoes way before it was allowed to hit the papers. Again, just a theory. Oh, and we've also been experimenting with electricity on the subject, so I don't know. You can make up your mind on which one. When looking at the photos of the destruction and other destructions, it looked more like a manufactured meteor fell from the sky, if you know what I mean. What I have noticed is the remains in the aftermath are mostly stone and brick, no charred wood, and a lot of the pictures still have wooden power poles. In other cities that have gone through similar, I've seen trees completely fine next to a devastated building. To top off the Peshtigo paradigm, the conditions of a firestorm were closely studied by the American and British military during World War II to learn how to recreate firestorms during bombing campaigns against cities in Germany and Japan. He created little wooden buildings, as you should at these, because all the buildings were wooden. I swear to God, dude. I swear to God. They created little wood buildings and studied how you would need to drop bombs until it created a firestorm. Well, this so-called firestorm was recreated and was used on Dresden and Tokyo by dropping thousands of tons of bombs. More people died in those cities than when Hiroshima got hit with whatever the hell that was. Wikipedia says this to discredit all the theories. There were already numerous small fires burning in the area as part of land clearing operations and similar activities after a tender, dry summer. Okay, Wikipedia. So, you're telling me that a wild and crazy out-of-hand land clearing operation amounted to a firestorm? A firestorm that the military wanted to come check out and see how it was done. Hey, how'd you do that firestorm there? All of these bogus stories that are repetitive and seem to have no true explanation has to be looked at. The 1871 flames decimated Chicago, but a little over 20 years later, the city looked like this. Welcome to the World Columbian Exposition of Chicago in 1893. In record-breaking speed, the city recouped from the Great Fire, then in 1891 started construction. The area of this operation was a 690-acre site that 40,000 workers constructed, landscaped, planned, dug canals, laid out roads and sidewalks, supposedly. It's also stated that all of these World's Fairs and Expositions infrastructure were made as temporary buildings. First off, where did you find 40,000 of the most efficient and talented workers? Nicholas Clayton had said that the buildings are made with staff and painted white to resemble marble, but you tell me if that looks like plastered buildings. I mean, the manufacturer's building alone was a 30-acre building. They actually didn't need Mr. Clayton because they had an even better architect, Daniel Burnham, who failed at getting into Harvard and Yale, so he decided to learn drafting at an architecture firm. He also previously attempted gold mining, druggist, glass salesman, and didn't succeed at any. Mr. Burnham met John Root, and they started this architecture firm, which would design the fair with little experience, and he hadn't designed nor studied architecture. Luckily, these 19th century narratives are super totally coincidental because Burnham ends up running into the richest man in Chicago, who was head of the Union Stockyards, John B. Sherman. Yeah, and then Sherman hired them to build his mansion when the firm had been open for only a couple of weeks. Then Burnham meets Sherman's daughter, coincidentally, and they fall madly in love. Aww. The mega millionaire Sherman is exactly where Burnham and Root got their contracts and who are credited to 4.7 million square feet of buildings within New York, Chicago, Washington, San Francisco, Cincinnati, Detroit, and many more. Oh, I forgot to mention, all of this was just Burnham, because after the first meeting, a year later, after getting the contract for the Chicago Fair, John Root died, mysteriously. But wait, there's more. Burnham had a friend, Frank Millet, who was the director of decorations for the exposition. In 1912, the Titanic set sail, and Mr. Millet sadly was on it. He would die within the waters that Burnham was floating in the SS Olympic from New York to Heidelberg at the exact same time. But Burnham would hit land with his feet, only to die 47 days later, supposedly from food poisoning, but whatever. Okay, so now that you know the main characters to this story are super legit, let's get knowledgeable. While the first fair is given to the 1851 London Fair, it was technically in Prague in the late 1700s. Then soon after, there was one in Paris held for 3 days. It was called the Temple of Industry, and guess who erected it? Napoleon. Yeah, the little evil mad man himself. I'm starting to believe he wasn't even evil, or little, or a man. I'm not saying he was a woman, I'm just saying, never mind. Anywho, after the first Paris Fair, the London Fair, 50 years later, is in my eyes what really set it off. Joseph Paxton was a simple man, a gardener, greenhouse constructor, and a downright hard-working son of a gun. So much so that he set aside his tomatoes for bigger dreams. London's Crystal Palace. This Crystal Palace is made of pure glass and iron, and sits at a whopping 1,851 feet long, 450 feet wide. For this structure to come together, it had to contain 900,000 square feet of glass and 3,300 iron columns. This would be the only Crystal Palace in London, but not around the world. Let's get to Chicago. In 1890, U.S. politicians wanted to make a statement to the world. The objective was to show that America would be the world's apex civilization. To portray this image of superiority, they picked the one and only Christopher Columbus, who didn't find shit. This alone, for me, says so much. Picking a man that was the gateway to our false history is, to me, intentional. It's all a game to the controllers, and they are winning by a long shot. Although this may have been a cynical joke by the elites, it's also the beginning of a long, continuous era of programming the brain. It was not just laying the groundwork for America's future minds, it was also to have a reason to present all of the arts, machinery, technology we once had, and then make it disappear. These inventions are part of a time that just doesn't fit with the narrative we've been told. It doesn't fit with the progression we've been told. So let's look at this manufacturer and liberal arts building. Yeah, the one that's 30 acres. If there were no pictures of this thing, I'd only believe it to be an Atlantean structure under the ocean from thousands of years ago. Yet, it was in Chicago. And what's even more insane, it was 1893. The building is the largest ever erected for an exposition. It spans 1,687 feet in length and 787 feet in width. From the floor to the ridge of the roof, it stands 236 feet. The structure covers more than 40 acres of exhibiting space. And to think, That monstrosity was built in 2 years, as well as the whole entire fair. 2 years? They could have picked at least like 4 or 5, maybe I would believe that. But the landscaping, well, that was another architect named Frederick Law Olmsted, who is the man behind Central Park and the U.S. Capitol grounds. Like his counterpart, Burnham, Olmsted also didn't get into Yale. Right before he was ready to enroll, he got sumac poisoning, which weakened his eyes. So he worked as a seaman, merchant, and journalist, but no architecture. Until his landscaping architect friend Andrew Jackson Downing introduced him to the known architect Calvert Vaux. Downing brought Vaux from England to collaborate on projects, to which he met Olmsted. Sadly, in 1852, Downing died unexpectedly on a steamboat in the Hudson River. How, you might ask? Well, a fire. Duh! So Olmsted and Vaux entered the Central Park design competition together because, well, I don't know, they liked competitions for these big projects, I guess. Olmsted's theories and political contacts made him someone Vaux wanted to compete with. They won, with their Greensward plan in 1858 to design Central Park. Olmsted had never designed or executed a landscape design in his life. Fast forward. Jackson Park featured several man-made pools and canals that allowed the buildings to be constructed on an island-like terrace. Burnham and Olmsted weren't the only architects within this impossible task, but it's still hard to contemplate. Not to mention the attendance for the fair was said to be 27 million people, with a daily push of 150,000 minds. And guess what? There's a coincidence in this story. Did you know that the fair actually caught fire twice? The first was in the cold storage plant where vendors served food. The building's design trapped firefighters within, and some even jumped from the top to their death instead of burning. This was the deadliest firefighting occurrence at the time, with 12 of them dying and 4 civilians. You know who the charges went towards? Daniel Burnham, the fair's main architect, for negligence. The other fire, of course, consumed most of the fairgrounds and damaged many buildings within the Court of Honor, while 20,000 people watched. Of course it destroyed all the main fairground buildings, you know? How else were they going to erase that? They can't show us. I mean, if it hadn't have burned the whole fair at this point, I'd think something was a little sketchy about this story. Now, that's just one World's Fair exposition. There's so much more, which is why I made this channel. It's for you to dig into it. Also, there's many other disasters and oddities within America and the world, and we're going to get to that soon. I hope you enjoyed the echoes of our ancestors' footsteps. They are becoming much, much more difficult to trace due to the inevitable decay of time and by the deliberate acts of destruction, as we've seen. Whether warfare, wars, and other acts of human intervention have not only reshaped the physical landscapes of our world, but have also altered the topography of our history. Cities like Galveston stand as a somber reminder of what is lost when nature and human conflicts conspire to rewrite our history. Thanks for watching.